I just have this prayer to start us off tonight. It's by John Beltry. He was a Canadian Jesuit, and he has all this really great stuff with regards to the spiritual exercises and living the spiritual exercises on a daily basis. He's actually passed now, but he used to be a retreat director in Guelph in Ontario in Canada. So, and I know everyone here is not Catholic or Christian, but I think this prayer can speak to all of us, so I'll just share this with you. Teach me to listen, O God, to those nearest to me, my family, my friends, my co-workers. Help me to be aware that no matter what words I hear, the message is always the same. Accept the person I am. Listen to me. Teach me to listen, my caring God, to those far from me, the whisper of the hopeless, the plea of the forgotten, the cry of the anguished. Teach me to listen, O God, to myself. Teach me to be less afraid to trust that small voice within, in the deepest part of me. Teach me to listen, Holy Spirit, for your voice, in the busyness and in boredom, in certainty and doubt, in noise and in silence. Teach me, Lord, to listen. Amen. Amen. So I'm really happy to be here tonight. And one of the reasons why I'm really happy to be here is that I'm really excited that my provincial has asked me to join Centro Altagracia staff into working in the social apostolate. At this point in my life, there's nothing more dear to me in my life than the social apostolate. And that was never the case really for me. That was never the situation that I had in my life, was that the social apostolate was something very important to me. I was in diocesan seminary before entering the Jesuits. And while I was in diocesan seminary, I was involved in fundraising and gift giving to the seminary. I did some vocations work. But when I entered the society and after I did the spiritual exercises, which is a 30-day silent retreat, I became more attuned to what I felt like God was inviting me to, and that was to people on the margins. But I'm going to get to that in a minute. The reason why I opened with that prayer about listening and being attentive to listening, and we're going to have this, tonight's going to be a discussion. It's not going to be me lecturing, but I just want to give a preface to this. The reason why I opened with listening was, the reason why I became involved in restorative justice was really the invitation that came from God to listen. And it was about 4 summers ago. I was in Crescent City, California. Does anyone know Crescent City, California at all? Katie, you don't know Crescent City? West Coast? No. Okay. It's the northernmost point of California, right on the water. It's so fabulous. It's rocky, it's beautiful. But there lies California State's maximum security prison, okay? That's where they have their solitary confinement. And for the very first time, I was going there to offer a retreat in the Ignatian tradition through the Jesuit Restorative Justice Initiative in Los Angeles. When I went there, I gave the retreat during the day. It was nice. It was the very first time I had done retreat stuff in prison. And the chaplain ended up coming up to me at the end of the retreat and said to me, you know, there's a guy who's in solitary confinement here, and he'd like to see a chaplain. He heard that the Jesuits were here. And I said, oh, I said, really? He said, yeah, he'd like to be a Jesuit. And I started to laugh hysterically. I said, there's a guy in solitary confinement in the California State Prison who'd like to be a Jesuit. I said, actually, at this point, I'm real good. I said, you know, I spent all day here at this retreat. I'm good. Well, that night while I was lying in bed and I was doing my examen for the day, looking over the day, I got thinking about this guy who wanted to be a Jesuit and was in solitary confinement. And the next day I went up to the chaplain and I said to the chaplain, you know, I really apologize for declining the invitation to go to solitary confinement. I said I felt like very much an asshole. And I said, I'd like to take you up on it. And I said, I'll go visit this guy. Well, this guy ends up transforming my life 3 years ago. His name is Robert Rivera. And when I met him, they put him in a cage like an animal, and he ended up telling me everything about St. Ignatius and how he read the autobiography of St. Ignatius and how St. Ignatius led him back to Jesus and how he just wanted to do very different things in his life. And so I brought Holy Communion with me. We shared Holy Communion, and we ended up parting ways. And he said, well, what do we do next after this visit? He said, well, what do we do next? And I said, well, the way I cope with stress is humor. I said, well, with all due respect, I said, I don't think you're going anywhere. I said, I'm going to be leaving here soon. And he said, no, could I write you? Do you have an address? And I said, actually, I said, I do have an address. So I wrote my address down on this piece of paper, and I said, you know, be in touch. I got back to St. Louis. I was finishing my degree, my master's degree in social work. I got back to St. Louis from Los Angeles, and there was a package sitting in my mailbox with a letter from Robert Rivera with a painting done in pastels. And the painting was of St. Ignatius sitting with, a painting of St. Ignatius sitting with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he said to me, what I would really like to do is read the autobiography of St. Ignatius with you, and I will illustrate the 16 moments of Ignatius's life as we read it together as my meditation. So while this guy was in solitary confinement, he did 16 illustrations of Ignatius's life done on manila envelope, used manila envelopes from my Jesuit community, and wrote me every month. But that wasn't the end. The miracle happened this past summer when I got a call from the California State Department of Probation and Parole saying that Robert had put me on a list of references for him, and they said that they had seen this transformation in him, and they were willing to release him back into general population in the prison. And so this summer I was able to join Robert in being transferred from solitary confinement, 10 years in solitary confinement, back to general population in Corcoran, California, and that's where he resides. And now each week we talk on the phone doing spiritual direction, 18 annotation stuff, and I just visited him about 4 months ago. Last summer I met with his family, and I met with the victims of the crime, and because Robert is one of these few, I don't know if you saw in the New York Times yesterday, but Montgomery, you read Montgomery versus Louisiana, the Supreme Court has now ruled that their ruling in 2012 of banning life without parole for juveniles is now retroactive, which means that the kids who were less than 16 years old who committed homicide and given life without parole are now going to be resentenced. Robert is one of those. He will be paroled in 7 years. And so this guy who was given life without parole and thought that he was going to die in prison because of the new laws that have changed within the state of California will be paroled and will be getting out in 7 years. And he still has this desire to be a Jesuit, and every week we're doing spiritual direction over the phone. He's still illustrating St. Ignatius's life through the autobiography. He's now working on Mark's Gospel. He's taking each chapter of Mark's Gospel and illustrating them. Last summer I had the privilege of meeting with his family and the victims. The victim is his brother-in-law who was killed by him when he was 14 after the sudden death of his father, Robert's father. And I met with the victims' families, the in-laws, and his family, and we had a beautiful discussion at a Mexican restaurant in San Diego about the reality that Robert was one day a lifer, and now with SB 260, which is the law in California, will be up for parole in 7 years. And I said, I've been appointed Robert's advocate by the state of California, and I said, I'm here to tell you what's been going on with Robert and my relationship with Robert, and I'm here to start a discussion between all of you and Robert so that we can move forward. It's been the most healing experience that I've ever experienced in my life with people in ministry, coming together and telling their story, right? The victims tell their story of exactly what happened and how this has impacted their life. The family, the mother, has come forward. She tells how this incident, this crime, how it's impacted her life. And Robert says, this is what happened, this is why I did what I did, and this is how I want to move forward. So there's been a bunch of writing back and forth. There's been some very good discussion, and we'll reunite next summer out in Los Angeles with the victims and the family to continue this discussion. It's moving in a very positive light. And so the reason why tonight I wanted to talk about restorative justice is I wanted to talk about it in the vein of very practical experience of people coming together for healing, for reconciliation, and restoration. We can talk all day about the academics of restorative justice because all you have to do is Google Howard Zen. He's the great writer on restorative justice, and you can all do that. But very practical measures of how we do restorative justice, I think, is a very important part. This past year, I was asked by the state of Missouri, they were doing some resentencing, passing some laws on resentencing for juveniles in their state senate, and the Jesuit conference asked me to address the state senate on juvenile justice reform because of my work while I was doing studies in St. Louis. And after I gave the address, the reporters were asking me, so you must do this type of work because you're so inspired by Catholic social teaching. And I said, no, not really. I said, no, not really. And they said, oh, it's because of Francis? Francis has really inspired you? And I said, no, not really. I said, I was doing this before Francis was Pope. And they said, well, why do you do this, and why are you talking about this whole thing with juveniles and reform? And I said that the only reason why I'm doing this is really not because of a great book that I ever read, but it's because of the people that I've encountered behind the walls of the prisons in this country. Okay? It's the experience that I've had with these people who have really shown me and deepened my own relationship with Jesus. And I think that that's what restorative justice is all about. It's coming together face to face with what's the real reality in our communities and facing head on and really addressing what the issue is. I just thought for our discussion I would pass out this sheet. Again, I don't want to lecture you. I just want to generate a discussion. But this sheet is taken from Howard Zen's book, Z-E-H-N, if you want to Google him tonight. But there's this great graph in here on two different views of doing justice, and I just thought I'd pass this out and it would generate a discussion. I was just up at Regis High School this morning giving a talk on criminal justice reform, and it was very fascinating to hear from the students on what their thoughts about criminal justice reform. And we're taking a field trip. We're starting a field trip in February where a group of students from Regis are going to go up to Rikers, experience the incarceration, and take the bus back with guys who are re-entering back into the community post-incarceration. So I think it's going to be fun. So now, oh, sorry. Thank you. Oh, did everyone get a copy? So this graph here shows basically different views, or how can we talk about doing justice differently than the way we might do it now, right? And maybe for people who aren't interested or who aren't familiar with how we do it now, it's basically what did you do, and what you did matches with a sentence, and then you're shut away in prison. Well, excuse me. Restorative justice is looking at something very different. They're asking questions of who has been hurt, what are the needs, and whose obligations are these? And one of the very striking things that happens in restorative justice when you're doing restorative justice work is that the person who's been harmed most is not always the person locked behind the walls of the prison, right? And you see that time and time again in every New York Times article or Washington Post article. People who have been locked behind the walls for all these years, have been set up or whatever it might be, that it doesn't take just one person to commit a crime. And if you will, I just last week watched the movie Spotlight, which was on the sexual abuse issue in the Catholic Church. There was the most striking line in this video that I think is that really can resonate with restorative justice, that the manager of the Boston Globe says, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to allow sexual abuse. that it's not just one institution. It's not, well, I think that's the same with crime. If it takes a village to raise a child, then it takes a village to allow this type of crime to happen, right? And it's all multifaceted. So I just want to ask you, who in here knows anything about restorative justice, have been to talks on restorative justice, or knows something about restorative justice? If you don't mind just raising your hand. Okay, good. Oh, there's a good one. Okay. So anybody mind speaking about what's most interesting to them about restorative justice, or what their understanding of restorative justice is, or? Go ahead.
Sure. I don't know that much. I've only been to a few kind of talks about it, and I'm a judge, a volunteer, and we had a woman come to our retreat who talked about it in the context of a school setting.
Yeah. Restorative circles, or yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know. I think the thing that strikes me most is it actually is a way of moving forward in which like all parties can move forward and be healed by it, instead of just doing like just going through the motions of, well, like, okay, well, you did something wrong, so you should be locked up, or you should be suspended, or whatever it should be, and going through the motions instead of actually like getting at the issue and like having people actually feel better after it.
Yeah. Remind me of your name again?
Hannah O'Keefe.
Hannah. So what Hannah was referencing was these things called restorative circles that are taking place within schools and in communities and in community-based organizations, actually, looking at who's been harmed, who has an obligation to restore what's been wronged to right. Okay, so you do it with students with interdisciplinary issues. You do it within small communities, whatever it might be. It's getting all the people involved, victims, offenders, and all the stakeholders together in one room, in one place, to really be able to tell my truth. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to me, and this is what I believe to be the truth. And then everybody comes together, and you realize that we all have some type of obligation, and then we can name that what it is for ourselves. Thank you, Hannah. Who else? Yeah.
So I studied it in a course I took in college in international politics and human rights. So I looked at it from like an international perspective, and especially in developing countries, how restorative justice is implemented.
Oh.
Just to kind of like expounding on what you're saying, I think it like redevelops the idea of politics. So everything you're just saying right now is just, I feel like, revitalizing how we understand politics. And that involves every aspect of individual of a community.
Sure, yeah.
And I just think that my interpretation of meaning can be vague, but is just a holistic understanding of the human person and the human heart, and how we reapply that into politics, into how we understand what a crime is, but then how we completely try to implement justice.
Right.
Justice can be just a buzzword.
Yeah, right.
What I understand as justice may be very different than what so many
Yeah.
Especially when you have two different cultures.
Exactly.
But I feel like we have a plethora of cultures as it is in our own country that makes justice a really robust.
And remind me of your name?
Meredith.
Meredith? Anybody here read Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy? Okay, one. Anybody else? Just Mercy? Two people. I talked to a couple of people about it. He has this great line in there, I think is incredibly Catholic, that without mercy behind justice, it's empty words, right? You can't do justice without having mercy on people. And that's the basic premise of his book, is that without mercy behind the justice that we do, it's just empty words. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Meredith.
So, I guess the first time I heard about restorative justice was really in the context of the idea that the pain doesn't go away at sentencing. Like that, there's still a lot of hurt that exists on both ends, in the sense of the victims of the crime and those who committed the crime, that it doesn't just magically go away once someone gets found guilty of the sentence. And like, so how do you continue to deal with what happened and create an environment where, especially in cases where you know that person, the perpetrator who committed the crime, is at some point going to come back, right? What are they coming back into? So how do you then maybe pave the way for a way for them to come back, but really about addressing the issue of just the ongoing hurt that continues even while that person is incarcerated?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, last year I was doing work in this prison in Farmington, Missouri, and Farmington Correctional Facility in Missouri is all for people with sex crimes in the state of Missouri. And I was doing this program called ICVC, the Impact of Crime on Victims. And it would get the victims together on the outside and then the offenders who were locked up on the inside together to tell their story of what happened, right? And then at the end, everyone comes together, like you were talking about with these circles, Hannah. There was this great moment in the midst of a conversation that we had, that's something Richard was talking about, that I'll never forget. This woman who was from Kansas City ended up throwing up her hands and said, well, you're going to be coming back someday, so we got to figure this out now. Well, that's exactly it. 98% of the incarcerated population will be re-entering the communities, right? So what do we do now? It's not enough to just lock people up, right? We got to get together to talk about how the re-entry will not only benefit the person re-entering, but will benefit the community and bring people together so that we can reduce this recidivism. Yeah, you're going to come back one day, so we got to do something about this. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Who else? Anyone else with any knowledge of restorative justice? Yes.
When I think of restorative justice, I also think about like ways that society, like why someone committed a crime and like figuring out how to prevent the crime before it happens. So like thinking more of a larger picture instead of just like one person's individual crime. Like why did they commit the crime and like who else is committing these crimes? Almost like the example of the school to prison pipeline. Like there's so many statistics of certain places, certain types of people are incarcerated and figuring out
Has anybody here, did you ever read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow Laws? Okay. The New Jim Crow Laws by Michelle Alexander. I just think everyone in the world should read this. It's incredible. But I read it a couple years ago when I was a novice. My novice master, my very first assignment as a Jesuit was to go to the Syracuse Justice Center and to work in the jails to help be a liaison between those who were being detained in the jail with their families. When I walked into the jail, I got so scared. And I was like, oh my Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. And as I looked around, I saw all these black and Latino people. And I went, well, aren't there any white people around here at all? And so I just got thinking more, and I held this inside for so long. And one day I went to my novice master, and I said, you know, one of the things about being at the Justice Center, Jim was my novice master. I said, there aren't a lot of white people. And he just looked at me and said, I think you're onto something. And that was the beginning of this, I mean, a complete ignorance that I had looking around and realizing the racial disparity, that it's really not about all these people being locked up in prison or in our jails, but it's deeper issues than that. It's much deeper. Racial injustice, education, disparities, zoning laws. It's much, much deeper than all of that. Thank you. Who else? Any type of knowledge of restorative justice or have any? Yeah, sorry.
Well, I know people that are doing work in restorative justice. So I know people but with a food justice component, like having people that were incarcerated working at urban gardens here in New York City. And people that I know personally that work with people that have been incarcerated. These people tell them that for them it's a therapy, being reconnected with the land.
Yeah.
You know, most of these people are people of color, so it's like
Yeah.
being reconnected with the land. It's very therapeutic for them.
Yeah.
With all that they've experienced in prison. So I know a lot of people that are doing that type of work more on a food level. Like they're working in gardens. And so yeah, it's a different way of like kind of bringing them back to you know, outside of prison.
There's this great organization in Los Angeles that just started this year, Urban Gardens in Los Angeles, and the only people that they're hiring, Richard is the first name of the executive director, he only hires people who are formerly incarcerated from the California State Prison, and they're doing just that, and there's all kinds of writing on it.
Yeah, so there's an organization in Brooklyn specifically, in Flatbush, that is doing that, and she tells me that they just get so into it, like when they're growing food, they just like, oh, that they're part of something much bigger, you know?
Yeah.
Bringing life, bringing these vegetables and fresh ingredients to this world. So, yeah. Something I know about restorative.
Yeah. So by training, I do psychotherapy. I'm a clinical social worker, and I do psychotherapy, and I work at Our Children, which is in Long Island City, and it's a reentry organization for women who are formerly incarcerated. And they're formerly incarcerated, they come and there's housing, and they be reunited with their children, perhaps even children that they gave birth to in the prison or on Rikers, whatever it might be. And there's a component to the reentry of doing psychotherapy. But one of the things I've really realized in this experience of getting my MSW and doing the psychotherapy is people in prison and people who are re-entering, and this might be people all across the gamut, just our human nature, people aren't really fundamentally most interested in being diagnosed, assessed, given great labels, you know, to go. I mean, it's a wonderful dynamic, psychotherapy. But people are very interested in being accompanied, right? People are really interested in being at their side and on their team. And I think that that's one of the things that restorative justice really offers, is that it's asking fundamentally different questions that the criminal justice is asking. So if you look on your sheets, it's asking very different question than what law has been broken. You know, what law is residing in this country. You know, it could change tomorrow. But it's asking who's been hurt. Or like Richard said, where's the pain? Where's the pain in all of this? Okay? Who did it? Well, restorative justice is asking, well, what are the needs? What are the needs in all parties? It's not really looking to pinpoint one person who did it, because guess what? The statistics and the literature, if you look in the Criminal Justice Review, we get it wrong quite a bit. Who did what, right? We get that wrong. But if we start asking a question of what are the needs of the area, what are the needs of the people involved, that's a fundamentally different approach to doing justice, right? And then what do they deserve? So we're looking at sentencing, okay? The 14-year-old boy killed this guy, and oh, that's murder, murder one, throw him away, you can go die in prison. Unfortunately, we can't give you the death penalty because you're too young. And the Pope, the very first Pope to speak out on juvenile sentencing, said that life without parole is the silent death penalty. He said, because the secret attached is we wish you could die, but we can't do it. Okay? That life without parole, the silent death penalty. And that's exactly right. And the restorative justice question says, whose obligations are these? So who has an obligation to this? And really, when it comes down to it, we all do. It's everybody. It's everybody. And it doesn't minimize a horrific event that took place. That's not what this is all about. But it's saying that we all have something to contribute to this. It's not just one person. It can't be. Anybody else have anything that they wanted to say about restorative justice, or been to a restorative justice talk, or what was most striking? Yeah.
I remember the first time that I ever heard of it. It was a lecture in my undergrad. I studied sociology, and we were looking at the disparities in statistics, because we study sociology, it's all about stats. So we were just looking at the disparity in statistics between just racial stats in prison. And the question became, what is the point of jail? What's the point? Is the point to just punish a person?
Yeah.
And if so, what does that contribute to the world, to
Right.
society, to whatever? Or is the point to rehabilitate the person, minister to the need of the person, and then make this person someone who can be of great benefit to society?
Right.
So I think, it's just to think about what is the point. I mean, we could apply that to many systems that exist, but what is the point?
Right.
If it's pointless, then
Yeah. You know, I don't know if you remember this past summer, Governor Cuomo went into the prison in Dannemora because there was the escape in upstate New York, and he went back to the legislator and he said something that no governor has ever said, and it was quite fascinating to me. Now it got shot down so quickly that it's never come up again, and I don't know why it left his brain, but he said it right away. He said, "I just wonder what it would be like if we just turned all these prisons into community colleges instead of what we're doing." Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, what are these jails for? What exactly are we doing there? And when you go and you experience the reality of this setting of incarceration, you can sometimes see there's not much going on. You know, there's very limited opportunities. And I'll tell you, just working at Our Children with women, my very first time working in reentry, most of my work has been in prisons, the women who reenter and have been incarcerated in a prison that offered higher ed, so women who are entering with an associate's degree or even a bachelor's degree, they're light years ahead of the women who don't have degrees upon reentry. Light years as far as life skills, as far as intellectual ability, writing ability, intercommunication skills, living in community because they're living in houses with other people. It's amazing what a little bit of this education will do. But it's required these private schools to partner with the state correctional facility to offer degrees within these facilities. And now there's some more stuff catching on with some prisons in upstate, and Medaille College in Albion is the female prison offering degrees. So more and more of that's catching on, but obviously it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time away from these institutions. So.
Can I also feel that there's an overarching problem just in the need to demonize? There's it's a pervasive need to demonize.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about international affairs, you need to find the culprit, the person to pin everything on. All the world's problems are ISIS.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all the world.
Exactly.
The need to demonize. It just creates a situation where we would need to break that.
Yeah.
So people can see that, oh, it's still a person.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
it's not a demon, this is a person.
Right.
With a mom and a dad and had a history and
there's a whole narrative attached to this. It's not just this isolated event that got him or her to this place. Yeah. Well.
I worked at County Jail. It's the second largest prison in the United States, Chicago's County Jail. I think an aspect that gets lost, and you brought it back to mind, the story of Robert, is jail can sometimes, like homelessness, it can destroy you, or it can deepen you in ways that are not known as seen. And so there were times in the prison where I would meet these people, because of what they've been through and the injustice, they have both often deepened their spiritual connection.
Yeah.
They relate in very different ways to the people that I was thinking as you were speaking of the Jesuit I was ordained with. His first Mass was in Baltimore. Mine was in New York City, so I couldn't go to his first Mass. I tried to go to the first Mass in North Bay. And he was telling me that at the end of the Mass, first Mass, this woman comes up and says, those petitions were absolutely beautiful. The petitions that we normally do in a Mass. And Kirk had worked at San Quentin. we had worked the same company in California. And so when she said that to him, he said, I will make sure to let John know, St. Quentin, that you like him.
Oh, wow.
He was a prisoner who he had worked with, just like he worked with Robert.
Yeah.
And when he knew of his ordination, he says, I'd like to contribute, and this is the way I can contribute.
Oh, wow.
And I never saw the petitions, but I really respect that.
Wow.
Probably would not have been able to write them before. There's something in the prison experience which is always to be avoided, right? And yet, what do they have to teach us? I mean, I encountered that pretty often in the jail. Like I told my, I think the Xavier High School now, I told my students, which is, by the way, a contained population. And you know, you never know what a person learns in life and what they have to do until you know what they did. Right? So, and that's true, not just in prison, it's true in the homeless. I
Yeah.
know some homeless woman who she teaches me how to play, to be honest. So there's a wealth of people and what they've been through and their experiences that is lost.
Yeah.
Because they're kept away, right?
Yeah.
I hope Robert, he has a few years left.
Few years, yeah. Yeah. I was just on the phone with Robert last Wednesday, and I was telling him that I have this theology on tap, and I mean he's been locked up since he was 14 years old. So I mean when he re-enters, it's just a whole different world, right? He's been locked up longer than he's been on the outside. And so I was telling him about the theology on tap, and he said, "Oh, didn't you do something like that when you were living in St. Louis?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's the one that involved drinking?" And I said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Well, have one for me." I said, "Okay, I will." It gives me great permission. But I think something that Ralph was picking up on was I was incredibly moved by the Pope Francis's gesture throughout his pontificate to people who are incarcerated. I've been really, really moved by this, that his eyes have been sort of on people who are incarcerated, that when he goes to visit a city, he goes to the local jail and visits people. But there's a line that he constantly is repeating from Pope John Paul II, which is fascinating, that in Pope John Paul II's homily to the youth at World Youth Day in Toronto, he told the youth that we will never be the sum of our sins, but only the sum of God's love for us and our capacity to be a reflection of the image of Jesus. And he's constantly repeating this every time he goes to the gym, or goes to the prisons and the jails, that we are, not to the gym, yeah. that too, yeah. That it can be very easy for us to get caught up in what we've done instead of really understanding the depths of how we're loved for who we are, right? It's easy to tally up and to make the laundry list of all the things we've done and forget the reality of who we were created to be and who we really are in the eyes of God. And I think that just ties up to the end of what I wanted to share with tonight, that it comes back to that opening prayer of being able to have the ears to listen. That all around us we're hearing today, and I think more than ever, of this cry for the 2.3 million people that are locked up behind the walls of our prisons, right? We don't hear much about them. 14,000 are in an island not too far away from here that we have no knowledge of. We don't know who's there. We have no idea how they get there, but we know that there's a colony of 14,000 people living on Rikers Island. This is the cry, I think, for mercy. I think this is the cry and the desire of the Spirit to animate the hearts of people who are very willing to accompany those who are crying out for a little help at this time. And so I thank you for allowing me to be here, and I thought just before we end, if you do have any questions or anything that needed clarification, we could end with that. I know it's 8 o'clock, so I don't want to go too far over.